I'm back with a review of the book How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney. In this video I'm going to talk about chapter 2, which is titled How Africa Developed Before the Coming of Europeans up till the 15th century. Contrary to the assumptions made by people unwilling to engage in this book with any sort of seriousness or objectivity, Dr. Rodney does not romanticize Africa. He doesn't present pre-colonial Africa as some sort of utopia bereft of exploitation before the evil white man showed up. He provides a level-headed analysis of how most of Africa was developing independently. In Africa, before the 15th century, the predominant principle of social relations was that of the family and kinship associated with communalism because land, the major means of production, was owned by groups such as family or clan. Similarly, the labor that worked the land was generally recruited on the family basis. In all African societies during the early epoch, the individual at every stage of life had a series of duties and obligations to others in the society as well as a set of rights. Age was the most important factor determining the extent of rights and obligations. Zimbabwe. Within the southernmost section of the continent, the area in which striking achievements were registered by the 15th century was between the rivers Zambezi and Limpopo, covering the territories that will later be called Mozambique and Rhodesia, because it was from the 11th to the 14th century that there flourished the societies, whose most characteristic feature was building of large stone palaces known collectively as Zimbabwe. Between the 11th century and 14th century, there existed a kingdom in southern Africa called the Kingdom of Mapimbukwe. Mapimbukwe was the precursor to Great Zimbabwe. In the 1930s, archaeologists in the University of Pretoria in South Africa found this artifact in a royal grave. It is a rhino made of wood covered in gold. This rhino dated back to the 13th century. The racialist apartheid regime of South Africa found these revelations a bit inconvenient. The apartheid regime concealed this golden rhino and other golden artifacts discovered for over 60 years. It was only after the fall of political apartheid that these artifacts were allowed to see the light of day. After surviving underground for over 800 years, the golden rhino had to wait 6 decades to be free from the clutches of the racialist apartheid regime. The intellectual base for justifying apartheid was that black people had no history before they came, and they even propagated a nonsensical myth that most of southern African land was empty when the Dutch came in the 16th century, and all this racist propaganda was challenged by this small rhino.
People at Mapungubwe also made their own exquisite objects, and some dating from the 13th century are on display at the museum in Pretoria, like this wooden rhino covered in gold flake, a model of a cow, a gold headdress that looks like a cup, and a small golden staff. These were used by the rulers of Mapungubwe and show what a sophisticated culture they had.
When Cecil Rhodes sent his agents to rob and steal in Zimbabwe, they and other Europeans marveled at the surviving ruins of Zimbabwe culture and automatically assumed that it had been built by white people. Mapimbukwe was a precursor to Great Zimbabwe. Unlike the ideological cousins in South Africa, the Rhodesians tried to downplay the African involvement. The Rhodesian government pressured archaeologists to deny that Great Zimbabwe were built by the Shona people of Zimbabwe and instead claim it was built by foreigners. Of course, the ideological bedrock of the Rhodesian government was that black people were inferior, they had no history, they came from nothing, they built nothing. So, acknowledging the fact that black people built Great Zimbabwe would have poked holes to that narrative.
17 feet thick in places and 800 feet in length. They're as big and impressive as a great cathedral.
These collection of ruins are the largest in Africa south of the Sahara.
Great Zimbabwe's trading network connected it with other African cities like Kilwa. Kilwa was located in what is now known as Tanzania. Kilwa was a major Indian Ocean trading hub. It connected Africa with India, China, Arabia, Persia. According to Moroccan traveler Ibn Battuta, Kilwa was one of the most beautiful and well-built cities in the world. In Kilwa, there was a palace that had 100 rooms, a swimming pool, indoor plumbing, Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of multi-storied buildings in the 14th century. Kilwa was looted and destroyed by the Portuguese in 1505.
What was once the most important and famous of all the Swahili trading cities. This was Kilwa, on an island close by the coast of modern Tanzania. Surprising as it must seem, up these steps some 600 years ago came visitors from all the countries of the Golden East, ambassadors, merchants, and what they saw spread out before them as they reached the top was a scene, a sight of remarkable and even unique splendor. But ruin struck long ago. Rising to great commercial wealth in about the year 1200, Kilwa was once a place of comfort and urban splendor. Its royal palace, one of the grand buildings of Islamic and Swahili culture, as portrayed in this accurate archaeological reconstruction. This once splendid mosque remains, even in partial ruin, a most impressive religious monument.
Mali had its prime in the 13th and 14th centuries, and Songhai in the two subsequent centuries. The Kingdom of Mali was said to be one of the richest states in the 14th century world. Their large deposits of gold, controlled by their king, Mansa Musa, was said to have made them famous worldwide.
Word about the wealth of these lands got out in time even to distant Europe. A famous Spanish map of 1375 portrayed the source and controller of that wealth. While the outline of North Africa was already known, the map gave Europe for the first time pictorial news of the far interior. This emperor was rumored to be the wealthiest man on the face of the earth.
Ibn Battuta, the Moroccan traveler, also visited the Kingdom of Mali in the 14th century. He was impressed by how safe it was, but he did not approve of the freedom that the women enjoyed. He wrote this. Of course, I'm not going to sit here with a straight face and argue that the Kingdom of Mali was some sort of feminist paradise, which was totally fair to women and everything. But I just found this interesting, so I thought it was worth mentioning. The Kingdom of Aksum was one of the most important of the nuclei around which feudal Ethiopia eventually emerged.
A unique civilization arose in this part of East Africa, with what is now Ethiopia and Eritrea at its center, the Kingdom of Aksum. In its heyday in the 3rd and 4th centuries AD, it was described as one of the world's 4 greatest civilizations. Traders like Futsum would have used currency hundreds of years ago in Aksum. In fact, Aksum was one of the earliest states in Africa to mint its own gold, silver and copper coins.
Nubia was another Christian region in Africa, but one which is not as famous as Ethiopia. In the 6th century AD, Christianity was introduced into the Middle Nile in the district once ruled by the famous states of Kush.
From the north, Christianity spread south into the lands of Nubia. This was once the far-famed monastery of St. Simeon, near Aswan. The story behind the finding and the saving of these wonderful mural paintings is almost a miracle. As the waters of Lake Nasser rose to engulf the old Christian Nubian city of Faras, archaeologists managed to dig down to the level of the long-buried walls of its cathedral founded in AD 707. And pulling away the dry sand, they saw what nobody had seen for centuries, these paintings, and removed them in the nick of time. Now safely in Khartoum Museum, they glow once again with their distant message of art and piety. A visitor in the 10th century, Ibn Salim al-Aswani, described the city of Soba, one of Christian Nubia's 3 capitals, as having fine buildings, spacious houses, churches with much gold, and cool, delightful gardens. Ecclesiastical art. Is a Nubian princess looking, I must say, very much like the Nubians look today. And here is the most famous of those mighty kings of the south, recognized by the peoples of that time, the 7th century BC, as among the masters of the world. This one, as it happens, received a favorable mention in the Bible, in the Book of Kings, as the emperor of Kush and of all Egypt, whose name was Taharka.
When Eurocentric people want to disregard African history, the things that they usually say is that Africa had no writing systems, that Africa had no multi-story buildings.
They had no concept of building big buildings, right? It's like the blacks in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa in particular, right? When the Europeans got there, they hadn't invented the wheel, they had no written language, and they'd never built a two-story building. They sucked. Your ancestors sucked.
These Eurocentric myths are, of course, very easy to debunk. It is true that most of Africa did not record history by writing, but it is completely false to suggest that Africa as a whole never had a writing system. I'll stick to Black Africa to give my examples. The Kingdom of Kush developed the Meroitic script.
There's another remarkable fragment of inner African originality. Here it is, a stone inscribed with a fully operative script that was invented for the African language of Meroe in the 3rd or 2nd century BC. 23 signs for letters and a word divider. One of the earliest alphabetical ways of writing invented anywhere in the world.
They introduced their own form of hieroglyphics, which is also pictographic, like the ancient Egyptian one. And it's one of the great mysteries of the Kushites. We just simply cannot read their Meroitic language.
Ethiopia developed the Ge'ez script.
The priest at the church shows me one of the oldest Bibles in Ethiopia written in Ge'ez. It's at least 1,000 years old.
In southeastern Nigeria, there was a writing system called Nsidibi. All this existed long before the coming of the white man. The Ge'ez script is over 2,000 years old. Now to the second claim. What Eurocentric people say is that Africans were never able to build anything more prestigious than a mud hut. The Ethiopians in the 12th century under the leadership of King Lalibela built these churches carved out of rock. These churches date back to the 12th century and they are multi-storied. In the city of Kilwa, in what is now modern-day Tanzania, from examining the ruins, archaeologists have been able to find evidence that they were multi-storied buildings. Stairways are very visible. Several historians of Africa have pointed out that after surveying the developed areas of the continent in the 15th century and those within Europe at the same date, the difference between the two was in no way to Africa's discredit. Indeed, the first Europeans to reach West and East Africa by sea were the ones who indicated that in most respects African development was comparable to that which they knew. To take but one example, when the Dutch visited the city of Benin, they described it thus. These people are in no way inferior to the Dutch as regards to cleanliness. They wash and scrub their houses so well that they are polished and shining like a looking glass. Yet, it would be self-delusion to imagine that all these things were exactly equal in Benin and in Holland. European society was already more aggressive, more expansionist, and more dynamic in producing new forms. When Europe and Africa established close relations through trade, there was therefore already a slight edge in Europe's favor, an edge representing the difference between a fledgling capitalist society and one that was still emerging from colonialism. In the next video, I'm going to talk about chapter 3, which is titled Africa's Contribution to European Capitalist Development, the Pre-Colonial Period.